Do you think we lack resourcefulness when it comes to steps because our world's just become so sedentary by nature?
We're so comfortable and we're so evolved technology wise and advancements in food delivery and all this stuff that again it's your job to eat and survive. You're going to naturally do those things, but at the same time there's a cost to that we've almost solved too many problems that we now have new problems.
The amount that obesity's gone up over the last few decades, how much do you think that's a contributing factor to the abundance of calories versus the lack of activity in the last few years?
Internet and sedentary activity. We can make money not moving all day. So you take an 8-hour block that not in people work in offices and stuff, but you give a lot more people the ability to make money and not have to move for 8 hours. I think 100% sedentary activity, which kind of does.
So Dean, I've been quite looking forward to this episode for a while because I've followed your content for a long time now, from the days when you were doing the sort of like things that you wish you could tell clients without hurting their feelings. And I just kind of resonated with the no BS attitude to calling out people's excuses. And I think, one of the big messages is that many coaches are far too agreeable and don't want to have those difficult conversations. And I can see the first thing that people are going to say when we start talking about high step counts and high activity is that my clients say they don't have time. So to kick us off, do you generally think time is an excuse for not getting a good level of activity up?
There's probably a few answers to that. I think, like personally, I don't think time is a good excuse. I think I get it, but at the same time, especially now that I have a kid, I can actually say I get it. So before the kid, I would be like, you don't know what it's like to be a parent. Like, well, now I do. So no, I think that there's enough time. I hate to use like the attitude of like how much time do you watch Netflix or how do you do this? It's kind of like the old sales thing where how much coffee do you drink a month? You can afford a gym membership. But like if you start to put logic and priorities in place, I think that time doesn't need to be an excuse. I think it's just a values priority disconnect. So that's a deeper conversation. But on the other end, I think it is a valid excuse because I don't think people necessarily understand that it is an excuse. Because again, the priorities and values aren't aligned with this thing or what they think that they want. And that was kind of like the main goal with a lot of this stuff was it essentially started as me just putting stuff on there. So I didn't have to tell my clients personally. So as a coach, I didn't want to be like the asshole coach. I was like, I'm just going to put it on my Instagram. Hey, like, let's just throw this out into the ether. And then I had a bunch of people like, were you talking about me? I'm like, no, I was probably talking about all of you. But I'm glad it worked. So yeah, that's my answer. Yes and no. But ultimately, I think that if you're going to pay for coaching or you're serious about this stuff, even from a client perspective, I think that getting around the thing of time has been my, like, I don't want to say my new effort, but it kind of all blends in. But time ends up being where it all points to, at least from the client perspective of excuses in my experience. So yeah.
I always say this when you put up an Instagram post, it's a little bit more sort of like to the point and cutthroat, and you'll get a client message going, is this directed at me? I was like, well, I didn't know this was a problem. You've just now admitted to me that you weren't following this piece of advice, like
exactly.
It sometimes tells you a lot, do you think some of this now, when people say time, is less of an excuse, but more resourcefulness? Like, I know I've had clients in the past where they generally think they don't have time. But then when you say like, well, could you park further away from work? Or, how much time do you spend answering emails, a day? And they're like, oh, you find time for them. Do you think we lack resourcefulness when it comes to steps because our world's just become so sedentary by nature?
Yeah, and I think that was kind of the main, especially a lot of those, I think that they all kind of derive from that spot was, especially at that time when I was posting, was trying to get people to understand a lot of times it is the environment, and that's okay. Like, again, you're talking about living in Hong Kong and the UK, but things are a little bit different in Western societies a little bit. And again, it's not their fault for being born here. At the same time, like, it still matters, right? And so that's where we almost get into this point where we're so comfortable and we're so evolved technology-wise and advancements in food delivery and all this stuff that, again, it's your job to eat and survive. You're going to naturally do those things. But at the same time, there's a cost to that we've almost solved too many problems that we now have new problems. And a lot of that just shows up in obesity. but sedentary activity. And so, yeah, like it's 100 in my mind. A lot of it, I don't want to say 100%, but like 90% of it environmental. And most people don't even know they're doing that because their environment is just like how they live. Like people don't think about that because you're just there. And that what it does is it just highlights the fact that, hey, this is probably potentially a problem, and then getting them to see that. And then again, the solutions kind of like, I don't know the solutions. Like you talk about parking away and all this shit, but again, everyone's going to be individual with that. But like, I'm not the expert on the solutions for your environment, but if you know what the problem is, the solutions kind of appear. It's like, just don't do all the stuff that you do in your environment, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
100%. You mentioned obviously like the rise in obesity there. Do you feel that obesity, the amount that obesity has gone up over the last few decades, how much do you think that's a contributing factor to the abundance of calories versus the lack of activity in the last few years? Like, what do you reckon has swayed the pendulum more?
Probably food. Like both. It's a really hard thing to answer. I think like food is really, really easy to get, but I don't honestly think it's gotten that much worse. I think that the biggest advancement in the food argument has been like DoorDash or Uber Eats. Just being able to deliver food other than American Chinese food and pizza, right? Once that kind of happened, people were able to get it more. I think that's probably one of the biggest contributors lately. But I think in terms of the last 4 decades, yeah, like the internet and sedentary activity, we can make money not moving all day. So you take an 8-hour block that not, and people work in offices and stuff, but you give a lot more people the ability to make money and not have to move for 8 hours. I think 100% sedentary activity, which kind of does blend into most food advancements, at least recently, even with grocery delivery, is combined not necessarily with worse food, but with less active ways to get it. You don't have to go to the grocery store. So you know what? My answer is going to be sedentary. But yeah, food obviously gotten worse. But I don't think food has gotten much worse in the last 100 years. I think it's always been shit for like since processing and all that. But yeah, sedentary activity for sure. There was some chart, I think PN sent it. I don't know if you're on their email list, was like the rise. I don't know if it was the rise in obesity rates with like internet age, and it was like it's not science, but there's probably something there.
Yeah, we always like throw out the term correlation versus causation as in that's terrible science, but like yeah, we always use outlier examples like the Axel Keys study with like there's a correlation in heart disease and televisions, but like at the same time, like we can see, if you can see logic between point A and point B, you're probably not far off. Like if there's smoke, if there's smoke without fire, right? And if internet people now are more sedentary with the internet, people can deliver food with the internet, and waistlines are going up. You can probably say that's a pretty good correlation between the first point to the second point.
Yeah, and it's like, are they ever going to do that study? Or maybe they have already, but like, I'm just going to use logic in like whatever. But you can put 2 and 2 together a lot of times. And again, I just don't think food. Like, I think as a society, like, and you always see that video on Instagram where they're like, and maybe they don't because you're in the UK and Hong Kong, but they're like, back in America, and I'm Canadian, by the way, but they're like, in America, in the World War II era, we did calisthenics and we created men and all this stuff. But the main thing was like, people were just doing things that were more active, even in the school system and stuff. So there was just a priority on probably being war ready, which is a horrible way to like push activity. But as a whole, right, like society was a little bit more active. And I think that the more advancements you get in, I guess, being comfortable in technology, it's all about like providing, but the less you have to do that in an active way, the more you have to do that above and beyond that stuff, which again, there's a big disconnect, which ends up blending into time. But the time was never really, there's lots of time. It's just what you're getting out of the time that you are invested in is just not physical. It's not coupled with physical activity, which kind of fucks a lot of people, right? But it's possible, but it's just harder. Yeah. It's just harder. And that's a weird thing to say. It's harder to be more active. But again, if all your money comes from sitting at a desk and then you have kids and you got all this stuff, it's like, yeah, and that's where I say I empathize with it is a problem, but that's still the solution. So fucking figure it out. And that's where the solution, you know what I mean? Like the reality is it's you got to do it, or you got to eat 800 calories a day, which you're not going to do. You could think
Well,
you're going to do
that's
it,
the
but
thing. It's one of the things that I always say to the coaches that come onto my mentorship. It's like setting expectations as a coach is one of the biggest skills that you can ever learn. And like,
Mhm.
while like I understand that eating less food than you're used to, and like maybe working on some of the emotional triggers of why you eat, or getting more activity in when you're sedentary by nature, is tricky. But like, I see so many coaches being like so agreeable on the things that, okay, we won't do that, but they never tell the client, well, the results are going to suffer if you don't do these things. So it's
Mhm.
like, well, either we refine the goal because you're not going to do the thing, or you do the thing. There's no magical
Yeah.
third option that's like the gates of Narnia. It's so like, obviously you must have this with clients all the time. Like, how do you kind of have that initial conversation with people where it's like they are very clear, like, this is what needs to be done, so we find a solution, or the goal doesn't get done?
Yeah, like, and I know, like, that was actually a really good way to sum it up. And the way I like to do that is just to give them the options based on. I'm obviously biased a little bit. They know I have walk marketing on Instagram, and like I send them a bunch of resources. Like my coaching process is like pushing high flux from the beginning, so like they kind of know my bias. But at the same time, like I present the other end, which is like, here's what's always been done, and it works. But works is like, I try not to bias it too much, but like works doesn't work long term statistically. Like you will lose weight, but you will probably gain it back. But it's a valid option, and I have people. There's people that lose weight eating less calories, micromanaging their food because you know what, they're busy, and some people like literally like if you have a tech job and you're coding, like they're not going to get that unless they get a walking treadmill. So the reality is this, and in some cases, I just paint what the reality is. Or you could do this. Some people are going to have to have big overhauls in their life. Some people don't. Some it's going to be small changes. But I like to just present both ends of the spectrum, or even a medium end of the spectrum, in the sense that you're not seeing results because of this, and the thing that you're going to actually do is probably the thing that you like the most, or you're going to actually do, and I don't care what that is. Is it this option, which is, hey, you're going to have to eat less calories, and you know what, you're not going to be active and you're not going to get more steps. Okay, cool. Like, this is how many calories is probably going to be, like, and we don't even know, it might be less than that. The cost of that is you can't have wings on Thursday. When you go to watch the Super Bowl, you can't have nachos, and you probably can't even go to the Super Bowl party because you don't have the ability to restrict the bean dip, because no one can like restrict and not eat the bean dip, because when everyone's eating it, everyone wants to eat it. Or you could do this option, which is like, you know what, we're going to watch calories, it's important, yada yada yada, but let's start with the movement piece and the expenditure piece. The cost, time,
Hmm.
having to finagle your environment to get more steps in. But the benefit is you don't have to cut that stuff out and just let them choose. And again, it usually ends up somewhere in the middle, because on Instagram, like my messaging, and even with those posts that are like cutthroat, it ends up being one or the other. But like that's more of a reaction to like what's been classically done, where generally it ends up somewhere in the middle. I think food's important, but I let them choose. Is the simple answer is I let them choose, but I give them the options based on what actually works, and it just ends up being, you have to do, it's not that you have to do this, you're not going to see results. It's like you have to do this or this. You fucking pick, and
Yeah,
then go from there. Because again, they're gonna have to do something. Like that is a truth, but I try not to hammer in the whole hard ass coach. You have to just eat chicken and rice. Um,
yeah,
if
I
that
think
makes
that's a really big. Yeah, 100% makes sense. And I think that's a really big factor as well, because one of the biggest frustrations that I see with a lot of coaches when they're getting people to track their caloric intake is that most clients don't know how to do it. They use the
sense.
bean dip as an example, like, but like, how many clients really know how much bean dip they've had? How many people really know actually how to track and eat a meal out? How many people like think 100 grams of chicken is way bigger portion than it actually is? And if activity is high, you've got room to make those mistakes, and you can sort of like counter against them. Whereas you've got so many people like reliant on that client being good and what the data they're giving them being accurate, that ends up with so many coaches going, my client's eating 1,200, 1,500 calories and not losing weight. And the reality is they're not on that many calories, but they may not actually consciously know what mistakes they're making. And you have to go hunting for what is the thing they're not
Yeah.
telling me, or the thing they're not aware of. Whereas if you got someone's activity up, there are way more, albeit maybe not accurate, but there are way more metrics to go, right, that is going in the right direction. There's very
And
few mistakes you can make on a step count.
Well, and that's exactly kind of where my head's at. And like, if I was to give any advice to coaches, it's like, because again, you see that all the time, and it might just be because I have so much experience with people, but like, you kind of learn real quick, or hopefully you learn from this, is that like counting calories works 100% when they're accurate. they're accurate 0% of the time. Like you talked about bean dip. I honestly I used that example because there was bean dip at a family get together. I don't know how many calories was in that. Like half the stuff that's like homemade, they don't even have calories on it. Like I can assume it's this, but it's probably double that. And so calories ends up not being a bad marker, but it's only a good marker when it's accurate. So as long as you're consistently inaccurate, we can work from that. But what I like to say, especially with the output side and the high flux side, is if we can push that, a lot of times we can get results. And then the accuracy doesn't matter until it matters. And you run out of steam with like the output and high flux at some point. At some point, like you can't outwork a bad diet or whatever. Then we got to start looking at, okay, can we start to actually count the bean dip or whatever? But I'm assuming from the get-go, no one's going to count calories. And that's a horrible way of looking at it. Maybe like a glass half empty type of thing. But like I haven't found anyone that's proven me right on that. And so if I know that they're going to be inaccurate there, I might as well push things that I know we can at least be more accurate and it works and has the end in mind. And then we can work on the food stuff while we work on that stuff. And then we tend to get results. There's going to come a time where you're going to have to figure out the calorie part. And it's to say, I still do that. Like it's a knowledge education thing, but unless they do it really, really well the first month, and that's really all it takes to figure out that there's tons of calories in olive oil, or there's tons of calories in peanut butter, or hey, when you eat out, that's not 500 calories, that's 1,200. That process doesn't take that long, but you need a good window to work within that. And again, depending on your clientele, if you work with like aesthetic people or like any comp people or powerlifters, again, they're going to be very adherent. So I would say throw my shit out the window. Probably push high flux a little bit, but general populations, like there's no fucking chance. So that ends up becoming an education piece that doesn't have such a negative impact if you work on the high flux stuff first, because then it's not a problem until it's a problem. Where if you just only do the food part, you're rolling the dice on whether you're going to get results, and really if it's accurate. So at that point, what's the only thing you get out of that is they learn a little bit about food, but they're inaccurate. So you can't even use any of that stuff other than to say, hey, they learned a little bit, which can not that helpful long term.
See, you mentioned a few times, obviously, the word flux. So for people who aren't familiar with the term energy flux, tell us a little bit about what that term means and why someone with a higher activity, other than the obvious, has got a better deal than someone with lower activity.
Yeah, so like the concept of flux is really just like, where's your energy balance? You can be at energy balance eating 1,000 calories. Like if you don't do anything and you sit on the couch, you're going to have your regular processes for your body to function. You're going to need this many calories and you eat that many calories. If you do more, you're going to need more because you have the baseline of how much your body needs to operate. But let's say I use Chad, you're 1,000 calorie Chad, like that's you. You're not active and you eat this much. To lose weight, you need to eat 800 calories. To gain weight, you need 1,200 calories. Sweet, you don't do any activity. If you do a bunch of activity, you can be 3,000 calorie Chad. To lose weight, you need to eat 2,800 calories, but you do tons of activities, so your baseline's, 3,000 calories, and then to gain weight, you have to eat 3,200 calories. And then I always use the example of which one do you want to be in a cut, right? Especially when we talked about this environment problem, this sedentary problem, most people fuck up with food. They're going to eat baseline, like whatever. Usually males eat ish around 2,700 calories anyways. If you eat out and have any sort of life, social life, females usually around 2,000, 2,200. Now those aren't exact science numbers, but that's usually through my experience where most people are at just existing, right? Like again, because everyone, at least in Western society, has a certain way of living, right? You go out, Friday's the weekend, we start the weekend, you might do one like social event on Saturdays. Fridays is kind of like, fuck, I hate work, I'm going to order pizza. And then whatever, Sunday you're hungover. And then that can vary differently if you have a family, but it's like there's a certain amount of calorie range. And so again, if you're in higher flux, that's not a problem. It's still a problem. You have to reduce your calories a little bit. But at low flux, sedentary, I only need 1,000 calories to operate. It's probably higher, like obviously. But now everything you do that is your life is contributing directly to the problem of you not being able to lose weight. And in most cases, you're gaining weight. So how do you change that if you're low flux? Well, you basically have to cut out everything that's your life, which works, right? That's the classic calories in, calories out. I need to be in a deficit. And all with flux does is attaches expenditure to it, but not just exercise. And that's where the neat part comes in. But pushing high flux is just which state do you want to be in? Basically eating more calories or eating less calories. And everyone goes to less calories. And environmentally, with this work sedentary thing, most people are just lower flux than they were in past times. And I think that's contributing to the problem when you layer on food, right? When you layer on, food's easy to get, and it's just better and has higher calories. And processed foods and chips are really good, and bean dip's really good. It's in the mix now, and my opinion is it's just not going to change. You would have to change everything about society to take bean dip out of the equation. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And that's a metaphor for all the good stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, this is just the way my brain's working as well, right? So if you use the example of Chad being on spending 1,000 calories, and you got then Chad spending 3,000 calories.
Yeah.
So we've obviously got the obvious answer that someone could be in the same amount of deficit with more food, which potentially would make the diet easier. But could you make the argument as well that even if both of those people, like 1,000, he was eating 1,000 calories maintenance, and Chad was eating 3,000 calories at maintenance, Chad's in a better position, potentially because the higher food will have a better impact on things like thyroid hormone, testosterone. You're going to be more metabolic processes are going on, which means the energy out part of the equation is probably going to be better. He's probably going to hold on to more muscle mass and potentially have the chance of gaining some tissue, which is going to have a metabolic cost. So even though these people are both, quote unquote, on maintenance, because of all these different metabolic processes that will be going on at the higher caloric intake, is 3,000 calorie Chad in a better position?
Yeah, and like I would argue, like and you basically just described what's all the good. Like, and there's a big kick. I think Kelly Starrett has the move stuff, and everyone's talking about the health implications of more movement and all this stuff, which is great. I love it. It's not enough for the stuff that we're talking about, but that's another conversation. But people that are more active have a lot better function of fucking damn near everything in a lot of cases, right? Like even in people that are, because there was this big thing about can you be healthy and overweight and obese? Absolutely, but a lot of the times it's because they fucking lift and they're just prolonging. If they stop being active, a lot of those metrics go down. Like you can look at, I think they had a study on NFL athletes, I think specifically D linemen, and they're massive and they're not low in body fat, they're very obese, but all their health metrics are great. But what goes along with that? They're fucking NFL D linemen who train and who died and do all this shit. So, but they're also higher flux. But a lot of it's connected to that expenditure piece, which then trickles down, or I guess would trickle up to all those other metrics: insulin sensitivity, diabetes, obesity, and even with that walking study, literally every health outcome that you could think of, gut health, all this stuff, was better with people who did more. So yeah, I think they're in a better spot. But I don't even think it's because inherently they're higher flux because we're eating up. Like they're in an environment where they're eating more food. But I think that the caveat is they're just doing more, right? Or they're moving more. I think that's the correlation, is that being active is better, which all of us now, right? But I guess the problem that I find is that activity has been devolved into, I go to the gym for an hour 3 times a week. And that's what my messaging, I put it on the walk more piece. It's like, no, like the gym's actually not enough. It's actually not even that much time in a total week or month or year. For some people, yeah, like some bodybuilders and shit, but like, even that's not enough. It's just not enough. So activity isn't going to the gym to do bicep curls. It's being fucking active for an accumulation of 4 to 5 hours a day, accumulated through all the stuff with NEAT. And so, yeah, higher flux. And that's, I guess, my disconnect with the messaging. And I know you didn't ask that, but that's kind of my answer. But more expenditure is why I like to use that as opposed to more activity, because activity has just been miscommunicated, in my opinion, in terms of what people do. Partially because we're biased as trainers. Lifting's good. We like lifting. You should go lift and be sports performance oriented, all this stuff, which is great. But that's just such a small piece in the greater total. It's good, but it's just not enough.
And it's more those. No, tangent's good, and it's more those hidden things that actually make the difference. Like I'm in the process of dieting now for my wedding, and I work with a coach I worked with back in 2016. And while I'm making good progress, it's slower than it was back in 2016. And you can go, and this will lead on to my next question. And you can say I'm older. I'm in my 30s now compared to in my 20s. Yeah. You know, it was almost 10 years ago. But when I actually stopped and I looked at it again, it's nothing to do with age. It's because while I'm still training the same amount as I was back then, my job as now moving from a gym floor PT to more of an educator and a mentor for PTs has become more of a sedentary job. I'm behind my laptop more. I'm sitting down doing mentor meetings more and less time moving about on sessions. And like, that's the stuff that sort of really does make the difference. Not the amount of training in the gym that I've, done per se, and like, and this is another big excuse you'll probably hear from, like, people hear from a lot of their clients, is that I'm getting older, and my weight loss is going to slow down more as I age. And in one thing I often, when I look at this, it's not people in their 60s and 70s that's telling me this. It's people in their late 30s, early 40s. And I've seen
Agreed.
enough amazing transformations to know people can make huge progress at that age. Like, do you think there is actually a slowdown even into your 30s and 40s in terms of weight loss? Or do you think the problem is when someone is 18, 19, they're doing 3 sports clubs, they're probably going out and doing some like Charlie and some ecstasy on the weekends, doing 17 million steps on the dance floor. And then they get to their 30s and they settle down, they have kids, and now their activities just dropped off. So they think, I'm eating the same and I'm getting fat, when actually they've just halved their movement.
Yeah, and you throw cocaine and MDMA into the mix, and there's a whole different. But like for real, like it's like their life is so fucking different, and that's what I would agree with, because they did that study, and that's everyone kind of, even with Lane Norton, all the big wigs were like, listen, your metabolism doesn't really lower that much with age. It does a little bit, but if you again, using logic, kind of like that PN thing with the internet and this much activity. Especially recently, I don't even think this has been that answer to that question was different 200 years ago. But yeah, like people's lifestyle, you'll go through these phases, and we're both in this phase. And so we have the experience of, especially because we're learning about this stuff, it's like, oh, this is what's happening. Because you're not going to, especially if you lift, you're going to lift in your 30s. But yeah, like you're not, when I was in my 20s, I was going to bar. Yeah, I was eating and drinking, but I was in college. I was walking between campus. I was playing football in college, and then I was working out, and I was doing this, and it was just such a different lifestyle. But that slows the fuck down. And for some people like me, it didn't slow down. I had a kid, and my steps went through the roof. But I think when you look at a lot of this stuff, as we're stressed out, we're working more. I think work, again, if you go back to that PN chart, work. When you're in your mid-20s, now you're starting to get out of college, and you're actually starting to work. And so what do you do when you work? You just sit down, and again, outside of the fitness trainer element or construction or whatever, like a lot of these aren't physical jobs. So yeah, I think that the slowdown is not really real. I think the slowdown is environment and lifestyle, and lifestyle meaning just your phase of life that you're in based on the society that we live in. You got to get a job, and getting a job means you just took 8 hours out of your day and put it in an office, which is a really negative way of looking at it. But that's kind of the overall sentiment, especially when we're looking at averages of what are people doing. That doesn't apply to you who works at or whoever's listening to this who's a fitness trainer. I think that's the disconnect from some of the trainers, and a lot of them is they don't understand it because they live a different life. And then once you kind of understand that, the solutions kind of create themselves, but it really isn't that hard. Like it, and that's why I think even the exercise thing is. I don't think the exercise has changed. Everyone knows the gym is good and they go to it. It's just not enough when you factor in you just plopped your ass in a chair for 8 hours a day. And I think that is more of a, I think that's more of the solution than the exercise part, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't. You didn't ask if it was that, but my short answer is no. I don't think metabolism has dropped 700 calories per day because you're 35 years old and you're stressed out and you don't sleep. That's fucking stupid. But that's the kind of sentiment is that actually happens. It's like, no, that's not real.
Yeah,
it might be a little bit.
I always say when people, because like this is an early thing I find with coaches they think like cortisol is the reason why their clients aren't losing weight, or sleep is the reason why their clients are losing weight. And while those things can mask weight loss and long term can slow these things down to a small degree, the two things I always say is that if there is a hormonal issue, like a thyroid has gone down, no one has a low thyroid, and then the only thing that's affected in their life is their weight loss slows down. Like thyroid has such an impact on every cell in the body that you'd feel incredibly tired and incredibly cold, and you probably wouldn't have a hard on for most of your life, because there's so much domino effects on this stuff. So and the horrible analogy is like you don't see many people when you look at sort of like Children Need or Live Aid or concentration camps. You don't see many people who are massively overweight because their thyroid slowed down. And it's a horrible analogy. It makes sense.
Well, energy availability and like red S, these things are all real. Like hormones are real, but I think that they matter in the sense that it's hard to accomplish your goal when there's a bunch of stuff working against you. And it makes it harder to do that thing. But you use concentration camps. You could just use the Minnesota starvation study. They just made them walk on treadmills and didn't feed them, everyone fucking lost weight. Guaranteed they're stressed, guaranteed their testosterone plummeted, because they're essentially having an energy availability problem. Everything under the sun gets fucking knocked off hormonally, right? And so, again, they still lost weight because they didn't fucking eat. The difference was they didn't have the option to eat because they were basically in concentration camp living. So there's that study. But then there's just this idea that, like, I can't even remember where I was going with this, but essentially, like, you can look at it in the terms of everyone is stressed, and that sleeping example is a good one. All these things are real. The thyroid stuff's real. They have studies where they've not knocked off testosterone, but people have still lost weight. I think they did knock off testosterone. Anyways, they had a testosterone blocking thing in the brain. They can't do that anymore. I think it was GnRP blockers to then plummet testosterone, and this was done before, like, they're like, yeah, it's fucking not safe. They still gain muscle, and they still, you know what I mean? Like, and that's a big thing. It's like, well, I don't have testosterone, I'm low testosterone, I can't gain muscle. That was absolutely not true. Is it helpful to do with more testosterone? Sure. But it wasn't actually that big of a difference. Now, if you do extraordinary, hey, I'm going to take a shot every week, yeah, that makes a little bit of difference. But this hormone argument is like, that shit is true, but it's not true. It just makes it harder. You can look at that with the hormones, GLP-1 agonists. So, like, for anyone who doesn't know, like, again, GLP-1 is essentially going to affect your hunger. How hungry am I based on the glucagon going in the system? But the point is that everyone's hungry, so they ate. Now with semaglutide and all these weight loss drugs, it's just a GLP-1 agonist, which mimics that. So essentially people are getting this fake signal, and so they don't get hungry and they don't eat. So it proves that, like, if GLP-1 is dysregulated from obesity and all this stuff, it's harder to lose weight because you're fucking hungry all the time. You take that out and people lose weight. So there's an argument for hormones matter, but the argument isn't that hormones are dictating what you put in your mouth. It's just making it harder to not put things in your mouth, or more stressed out and tired so you can't go work out. You can definitely fucking make it work. But that's where this thing gets tough, is because now you're making choices on, how do I recover when I'm tired and I have kids and all this stuff. Totally, that's where we go back to that first argument. I empathize with it super hard, but there's other ways around that. And that's kind of where this high flux argument, if we go back to that, is it tends to take care of a lot of that stuff, including GLP-1, because the higher energy flux, and the more movement you get, GLP-1 is less dysregulated unless you're less hungry, right? And then you're not stressed out because you're actually fueling for a recovery. You're not just slamming yourself into the ground with an energy availability problem. And so, yeah, like, I think a lot of it ends up looking like energy availability or signs of red S or overtraining, however you want to picture this. But stuff starts to get knocked down the second you start to take away food, and you over-exercise, or you're super stressed out. And again, the problem ends up being an easy fix, but it's not easy to get people to realize that, because the argument is that these things are causing me to gain weight. Like, no, they're just part of the process.
Yeah. I think when you look at the hormonal argument in some of that, people don't understand that this actually affects the energy out part of the equation. So even if you get your bloods tested and you're on a lower end of a certain hormone, and for some reason you haven't felt any of the symptoms other than slowed weight loss, the question is, what are you going to do about it? Like, the actual solution is the same whether that wasn't the case anyway. It's going to be probably do some more activity, probably start to move up, improve the quality of your nutrition, and potentially eat a little bit more. Like, the answer is the same regardless. So you can use it as an excuse. It's like, well, I've got the slow thyroid issue, or you could use this thing as like, okay, let's get moving and let's get doing stuff. So you mentioned, because this interesting, you mentioned about GLP-1 and the effect that activity has on potentially hunger, because the devil's advocate argument that a lot of people would say is that obviously the more activity you do, especially activity of higher intensities, the more hungry you're then going to be. And you, or as you were saying that earlier on about the accessibility of food is now more than it ever was before, potentially could see people blowing out their calories. So, like, is the argument always to increase activity, or is there a limit where hunger becomes so much of an issue in a world where food is so comfortable that people end up being overeating more than they actually are over-exercising?
Well, that's where, like, it depends on which way you look at it, but it's been proven that, like, essentially people exercise and their assumption of how much they need to replace that energy deficit is way more than they actually need. And so a good example I always use is like, especially with running or a hard lift, like you're burning maybe a couple hundred calories. You could do the same thing walking. And this might not be scientific, but they've looked into the hunger signaling with that. No one wants a cheeseburger and fries or a piece of pizza after a walk. You go smash a high volume lift and get some squats and deadlifts in and whatever, pick your poison, hit workout. Like, I'm hungry as shit. Same thing with running. It's like, I never was so, like, I tried to do, this is way back when I was powerlifting. I wanted to deadlift 600, I wanted to deadlift 600, bench 400, and run a marathon in the same day. Okay, so I was training. It didn't happen. I fucking got injured. Very stupid goal, but totally possible. But the point is like I did like a marathon hybrid training template where I had a concurrent model, but I was running a lot and my mileage scaled up over weeks. I had never been so hungry, and I actually put on mass, and a lot of it was bloat, but I put on so much weight because I had to fuel so much. I was ravenous every single hour of the day, and like I was running like an hour a day ish, right? Fuck, that never happened when I walked, and it really didn't even happen that much when I lifted. And so yeah, I think there's some dysregulation in terms of what our hunger signaling is with very active exercise that can kind of contribute to it being harder to diet. And that's why I don't necessarily push exercise. I kind of like use, and again, I work with general populations a lot of times with people who want to lose fat. It's more aesthetics, and they're not like pushing a powerlifting goal. If they're trying to be a good jiu-jitsu athlete or aim for a top powerlifting goal, different story, like figure it out. But a lot of times that's why I push NEAT. It just doesn't tend to happen as much. It's lower intensity. And I think a lot of times the intensity or the fatigue attached to something a lot of times has that dysregulation and hunger, where with walking, it tends to be the opposite. And I posted like a study on my Instagram at some point, and maybe I didn't post the study because I don't want people to find it because I want to keep my secrets. But there was like an appetite study, and they weren't even looking at walking, but they used walking to increase people's expenditure. And they had an ad lib group, and then they had the control group at an energy maintenance and energy balance and plus sort of. But they had the control group and they had the ad lib group. I didn't give a shit about the control group because I already knew the answer to what was going to happen. But they had people that walked 2 hours, or they had people that walked 1,000 steps a day. Or something stupid, had people that walked 17,000 steps a day, and they had people that walked 32,000 steps a day. So basically a lot of fucking walking. That's a lot. Like 17,000 is probably the high end of what people could probably accomplish. You throw in rucking and stuff, it's different. But the point is the ad lib group on the 17,000 steps didn't lose or gain weight, eating whatever the fuck they wanted. And it was much higher because they made them walk this much on a treadmill. You have to walk whatever 2 hours every 4 hours or something stupid. 32,000 group. Lost weight, eat whatever the fuck you want, because it was an ad lib group and their calories are something stupid. I should look at it. Like the males was like 3,400 calories and they lost weight. Okay. They were, or no, sorry, it was at like 2,800. The calories didn't really move. Once NEAT scaled up, I should explain this better. Once NEAT scaled up, hunger didn't actually scale that high as you would expect. And that's what was crazy to me, is that like they could get the expenditure and the output without the hunger. What they found was that the GLP-1 with the groups that went from 17,000 steps was higher. So their hunger was knocked out. Very similar to semaglutide. It was very, very, very similar to semaglutide with the 32,000 steps. That's a lot of fucking walking. So don't get twisted. But it had the same results, in my opinion, as like weight loss drugs that are agonists to it to make that happen, which is crazy to me. So it's like hunger signaling ends up raising up with flux, which they have found anyways with high flux only studies, is that the hunger signaling, so GLP-1 got fucking like increased in that. Like decreased. So like their hunger appetite was fucking knocked to the roof or down to the floor through doing more activity that was situated through NEAT, which is nuts to me. Which it's a weight loss drug. It's simulating what weight loss drug is, but it's like just us doing walking. They haven't done the study with running, but I'm sure it would be fucked up. Like I'm sure it wouldn't work. Like 100%.
But you also got to think about, you know, with some of these things as well, the impact of psychology in terms of activity. Because it's like I'm not necessarily sure how they were measuring hunger in that study. I mean, I don't know if there was actually blood tests to see this response from glucagon. But like, if you're looking at like a subjective level of hunger, like, well,
100%.
we all know hunger is so many things. It's boredom, it's stress, it's emotion, it's all this stuff. And if I did 30,000 steps a day, right, I'd probably spend more time actually clearing my head. I probably don't have as much time to be bored or lonely. So I'm less likely to go for those things. And also, like, I'm a big fan when I start working with a Gen Pop person, if possible, to say, I want you to train 3 or 4 days a week. And then on those days where you're not going to the gym, I want you to go up and do some cardio or go for a big walk or just do something active on that morning. Because just the process of getting up and doing something active for your body every single day, whether it's high or low intensities, is going to be a thing where you go, well, I don't want to fuck that up. Whereas if I'm sitting on the sofa watching Netflix and that's my only thing for the day, I'm more likely to grab the bag of Doritos than if I got up and went for a walk in the morning or gone up and did some lifting in the morning. So many people might actually not fall for the hunger signals because their self-esteem is potentially higher, which is, again, correlational, like we said at the start, but they all impact create a positive environment for weight loss.
Well, and that's just it. And like, again, intention goes a long way with that mental energy. And that's kind of, I had a post about, and I believe this is like, if the intention is to go walk to lose weight, we've already lost, right? Because then you're going to count calorie expenditure of calories in like that equation. I have no idea what's correct on that. That's why it doesn't matter till it matters. But if the intention is just to get outside and get active and do more NEAT to me is attached with, I'm not going to smash calories or to gain muscle and stuff. I'm just doing stuff. I'm going outside. I'm doing this. Yeah, you could label that as exercise, but it's like you said, you're going out to clear your head. There's so many other benefits mentally. And what I like about the walking thing is that the mental stress that's connected to I have to exercise is not there, but it is kind of exercise. Like, but really it's just moving. Where that intention isn't this, like, I think intention's everything, but I think just being able to get outside, people aren't going to argue that they feel good after going for a walk, but they have to get out and do it to feel that. And it makes a world of a difference once you kind of get there, because then it's not about putting intention on weight loss and all this stuff. It ends up being a byproduct, but they get all that other stuff with it. And then you can look at the GLP-1 and all this stuff and like, see, this is why. But there's that subjective experience, which I don't think is the same. I don't think that it's the same byproduct with exercise and exercise being induced to gym activity, right? Or this run. I think the byproducts kind of are the same, but it comes along with that mental stress, which feeds into that negative feedback loop that I don't think works, and that dysregulation of hunger. So it's just like kind of doing like what you said is like all the other benefits are these things, and that's probably the ones that should be highlighted the most. But that's hard to do when we're trying to educate people and doing trainer stuff. And we want to look at the GLP-1, and that's why I try to stay away from it almost completely and just be like, walking's good. Walking's good because of all that stuff that you're talking about. But if I talk about all the mechanisms, then it's turning into this freak sideshow that people are trying to squeeze all their GLP-1 or dopamine out of it. Yeah. It's like, no, like the second you get there, you've already lost because you're not going to do it. You're putting way too much attention on the stuff that doesn't matter.
It's that thing of the person who enjoys a destination will never walk as far as the person who enjoys walking. And you know, like the more we can get people to actually sort of like enjoy that process, the better. And success leaves clues, right? If we look at the people that stay lean year round, they're probably people doing 3 or 4 active hobbies. They're the people that go out for hikes for fun. They're not thinking, I need to do this to stay below 10% body fat. Staying 10% body fat is just a byproduct of their lifestyle. And our job is to try and get as clients may never get there. But if it's a spectrum from where they are to that point, how close can we get them to the point where they're enjoying the lifestyle that ends up giving them the body that they want?
Well, and that's where like my recent push, like I obviously talk about rocking and stuff, but again, this time thing has kind of been where I've been kind of living or researching lately, just like even in practicality purposes of general population, is like, this is always going to pop up, right? If you go back to time. And so it's like getting this process that people like, that's usually what I want people to get to. And it usually is going to be like, if they want weight loss as a byproduct, needs going to have to come up. Walking is going to have to come up. Activity is going to have to come. Hobbies are going to have to come up. But that's still that mental energy of it has to be there. I want to get people to the point where they like doing it and they have a process that they enjoy so that they will do it. What are they going to do when they put intention on this? The rucking or the time argument is, how do I squeeze more out of that without the mental energy attached to that? That's where if you're going for a walk in a park and walk your dog, you're fucking doing that anyways. Your dog's going to get overweight and like, hate you. So you're going to have to do that anyways. How do I squeeze more out of that? That's where throwing a backpack on with weight is. Or how do I squeeze more about going to the grocery store? Get parking further away. It's trying to make these little additive changes, because the second we put intention on, I have to do this because of weight loss and I'm not enjoying, or this isn't part of my everyday activity, we've already fucked it up. And so getting more out of that part is kind of all where I guess a lot of what I see as successful people get to. They enjoy the process. They found their things. Now how do we squeeze more out of it? Because the environment's so screwed up. I just don't believe people are going to get the most squeezing out of with the food. I think that there's going to have to be some base level changes, but it's like, I just don't think cutting things out is going to be the highest priority. I think that it'll be a priority at some point, but that's where if we can squeeze more out of this stuff, we don't have to look at that. And most people don't have success long term with that. They're going to get it out of there. Both are still diverting mental energy to figuring this out, but I think that one comes along with mental upside that you were talking about. Hey, I feel good. I do all this stuff. The byproduct is weight loss, but also the byproduct is I feel fucking good. And yeah, I have a little less time, but I'm starting to understand that a little less time devoted to Netflix actually makes me mentally better. I've never seen that a lot of times, unless like you switch to like a relatively healthy diet-ish, but I've never seen that with I cut out tons of calories. Never seen that. Like it always ends up in this fucking sucks. And again, different. Obviously, that's not going to be the case for everyone, but generally, that's where it gets on with people, especially wanting to lose weight. Is like you start to cut calories and like you cut out everything that's fun and like don't live your life. That's the sentiment. Where the other one is like go live life. The food we can figure out after, and it probably won't matter as much as you think.
Do you think there's an element of sometimes that people have to get out their own way? And I'll give you an example of this. Like I think so. Like almost people find excuses before they actually start to get to the point where they can enjoy some of these processes. One of the things I often get to do people to do when they come in is I often get a real clear idea of the future they want to be. And I'm very clear point. I don't just want to know how you want to look. I want to know how you want to feel, how you want to behave, how you want to perform. And I hear things like, I want to be this kind of person that preps his meals. I want this person that gets up in the morning and goes for a run. And then they proceed not to do the thing. And it's like, well, you know, you're going to have to do, it's not this thing when you're 6% body fat, you're all of a sudden motivated to go for that morning run. You have to embody that person now. And a lot of the early work is almost just trying to mitigate excuses. Like I have, I've had this great example with a client once who was like, I have no time. And I was like, I could say, take 10-minute walks every hour. And he just wouldn't do them. But what I thought, okay, I'm gonna play double bluff on this guy. And I'm just going to go, okay, cool. So, how much time do you spend answering emails? He goes, about 2-3 hours a day. I'm like, okay, cool. So do you have an email app on your phone? Yeah, I've got an email app on my phone. Okay, fantastic. And do you have to take your desk work or you can work around the office? Oh, yeah, I can walk around the office. Fantastic. So I want you to, what we're going to do is we're going to do 10-minute walks every hour, answer your emails on your phone. And I had to get to the point where there was no comeback of an excuse because I've taken it away before I told him what I wanted him to do. And then he starts doing it. And only then, because I kind of tricked him into not having any comeback, 3-4 weeks down the line, he's like, do you know what? I feel so much better. I'm getting more out of my work. But he would have never have done that if I suggested the thing at first. He would have found every excuse under the sun not to stop.
It goes back, again, and I agree. Like, so like walking treadmills, fucking perfect hack for the current environment. I don't even, I'm mine's in the background. I'm actually on a low sitting desk. I don't know if they do that in Hong Kong, but everything's low. And I have mobility. Anyway, that's a whole different argument. Point is like everything, and especially in tension with the meal prepping and stuff, is based on this picturesque profile of what they think this thing is, right? And it's kind of what we've pushed, if you look at any influencer culture, even from like Arnold days, is like, this is what like healthy people who are shredded do, right? And so I think it's this ideology of this is what they think it is. And when they actually do what it is, it fucking sucks. And so, and they're not going to do it because it doesn't fit in to what people actually do. But the things that matter and the things that they can feel when they actually do it end up being those things. It's like, how do I get this stuff in? Everyone gets deduced down to I gotta lift and I gotta prep my meals and all this stuff. When really you just made him do probably an extra hour and a half of walking, which ends up being 7,000 steps ish, like whatever it ends up being. And that's why I like to start with that stuff. Because again, the prepping and stuff probably has to come. Like I'm not going to say hey, planning your days out is going to be helpful, 100% helpful. But it's these things that are going to, that will work until it doesn't work. And then it's always going to be eat less of that. Those types of things are squeezing stuff that they're already doing. You just have to highlight, hey, this works. The problem is convincing people that that's the real shit. That's the golden ticket. That's the simple stuff, because that's not what they're sold and what they see every day. They're not seeing, hey, go answer your email. Like some people throw it up, but that's not the overarching loud message, is that you're actually just not fucking doing anything. If that was the message, I bet I bet we would see a lot more changes. But I don't think that'll ever be the answer because that's fucking not sexy. And like the people that are shredded and big, and they don't actually do that because they're trainers and they're fitness people. They don't have real jobs, and they're shredded and they're on steroids and like all that stuff works, but it doesn't work for Chad, your client, who's like
Yeah.
real. And that's where I think like the disconnect is more the messaging, which is part of my messaging is to be the exact opposite, which is
Yeah.
probably just bullshit. Like if I'm being honest, but I think if you land to that, that is you get a few more of those strategies, and you're now talking with someone who can eat a little bit more food, who probably be a little bit more successful than your average weight loss client, which isn't successful and gain all their weight back. Again,
So with some of the approaches that you potentially use with clients, like we know that like any sort of caloric expenditure tracker on is insanely inaccurate. So if you're working with someone like a Gen Pop client, like your average day Chad, and you're trying to get his activity up, like what is your approach to start scaling this? Are you setting targets with him? Are you just finding time in his day? Like how can a coach go about doing some of the stuff you're talking about?
So like, I actually just for anyone listening, I just made a post about this today. It wasn't planned, but to be honest, like literally, I start with kind of like you were saying with the end in mind, but it's like I start with the ideology that like, hey, classic ways suck, my way's better. But how does it look practicality wise? I throw them a bunch of resources and I explain to them like this is what I think is important. This is why. Let's just work on it. I don't give a shit what we do. We're still counting calories. I work for a company that has macros. It's like planning. There's all these resources of food, but I just let that be, do all the stuff. And then I say, here's the things I think are important. I think NEAT's important. I think exercise is important. I think all this shit's important. What happens when you put intention on it? Okay. And so intention means essentially walking more, finding the cell phone email thing, maybe going for a half an hour walk with your dog instead of a 15-minute walk or 10-minute walk just to get it in, and seeing where you land. Is that 3,000 steps? Is that 4,000? Is it 8,000? Is it 9,000? Get a baseline when you're like, hey, when you actually believe it's important, or you just listen to me that it is important, whatever reason you do it for, hey, I'm going to just buy into the concept that expenditure is a little bit important. Where do you land, right? And where do you land when you kind of do the food stuff? Figure out where that is. Is it 2,200 calories? Is it 1,800 calories? Whatever it ends up being, wherever your steps end up being, get a consistent baseline from there, and then just add and subtract. And that's where I present the options that we talked about at the beginning is like, I don't say you have to do this or you have to do that. I just say, hey, these things are important. Fucking figure out where you're at when you put a little bit of attention on it. It's not going to be the end goal. It's going to be probably like 6, 7, 8,000 steps. Cool. It's a good starting point. All the health benefits are there. They lose a little bit of weight. But I start with where they're at plus a little bit of a nudge. So the nudge gets them there, and that's my baseline. I don't want to see the baseline of where they're at because wherever they're at, it's not fucking working. So it really... I've had enough clients where I know what most people are at. They're at that 2,500 calorie mark for males and 2,200 calorie mark for females, probably 3,000 a little bit maybe for some males. And they don't walk. They walk 4,500 steps a day. That's the average. It's generally pretty true from what I've seen. If they're a little bit more overweight, it's generally lower sedentary, higher food. But either way, I kind of know where they're at. Let's get the nudge baseline from where you're at to a little bit higher. Then just pick and choose. How do you want to go? You want lower calories? Here's what happens when you lower calories. Totally works. But you're going to have to give up this. Hey, or you could just like walk 2,000 steps a day. Where do you get that from? Don't fucking care. Figure it out. But I don't always say that. But a lot of times it is just that. Like 2,000 steps is an extra 20 minutes of walking. Add 20 minutes onto your dog walk. Boom, done. That's how we're losing weight for the next month. And then just scale it from there. But I would say my answer is find a baseline with a nudge of biasing the importance of high flux. Obviously, that's a coaching thing. I don't think that's going to work for a general population on their own. But if you're working with a client, that's usually what I find is the best because then you're not putting direct numbers on this is good and this is bad. This is good food and this is bad. Because then, again, it's not letting them kind of figure it out on their own. And you're biasing what good and bad is where they're going to feel it. Like you said, your client's like, oh, man, I feel so much better. That's what I want. I want them to feel it. I don't want to tell them, hey, you're going to feel good when you do 12,000 steps. Because that might not be true. And if it isn't true and they think that it's true, then they feel like they failed or that there's something fucked up. So I want those things to come on their own with a little bit of a nudge on the high flux part.
Do you tend to periodize activity, like gradually increase it obviously, like
Yeah.
there's on if someone's low, we're going to gradually increase. But from the outlook of, so over a time of a diet, NEAT is going to go down. And when I refer to NEAT, I'm meaning more subconscious NEAT, not activity and steps, right? Like you're fidgeting and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Now, with that in mind, you might find that someone, as you said, intent being that big thing, it's someone who gets up and they're going for their walks in the morning and they're power walking it and it's ace. And then they're still doing the same walking, but it's not the same walking. So do you tend to have like set intervals where you start to go, right, 6 weeks in, I'm going to add a little bit. 8 weeks in, I'm going to add a little bit. Or does it just depend on the feedback the client gives you?
A little bit of both. I think like my rule is, and again, I'm working on the assumption that they're not counting calories correctly. And even sometimes with the energy expenditure, they're like, whatever. Give me 3 weeks of you getting your best. Because what I don't like is again, give numbers and you have to be perfect. At the same time, I think that that's a tool I use for plateaus is like, hey, just fucking like hunker down for 2 or 3 weeks. Do the shit. Like, no matter what. Like, let's get aggressive, but aggressive within our plan of, like, can you just fucking hyper focus and hit your shit? If they don't lose weight and I believe that they hit their shit, then it's like, let's increase steps or decrease food. But what I find a lot of times is we'll just base level generally, they tighten up a little bit. And it's usually on the food front. So that's usually where food trickles down to, food still matters. They tighten up a little bit and go fucking figure. They start losing weight. I think the subconscious down regulation of NEAT, unless they're like a really, really like on point client, you know they're fucking on point, then if I know the fucking person's solid, there's gonna be a down regulation of NEAT or just processes or fidgeting, then they're gonna have to cut calories or raise steps. But I trust them to do that. With most people, I don't trust them to do that. I think that the down regulation of NEAT is actually just probably not happening because they're subconsciously eating a little bit more or not measuring. So it kind of offsets that, and tightening up kind of fixes that. A lot of times I don't find that process happens very much because I don't think the mental strain of being in high flux is as high as low flux, and I don't think that they have as many overages in that situation. So I'm just, if that makes sense. Essentially, no, I don't, but I get them to tighten up because in high flux, a lot of times they're not craving food all the time, and there's not really that much down regulation in NEAT because they're not losing weight super fast because they're not hyper aggressive on calorie cutting. And so a lot of those hormonal changes don't happen at the same speed, especially that GLP-1 hunger rating. That's usually the benefit of, like, usually what I find is all that bad shit starts to happen, down regulation of NEAT and overeating, happens when people are hungry, right? And usually people are hungry with energy availability problems, which happens a lot of times in low flux. High flux kind of gets rid of that a little bit. It doesn't get rid of it completely, but when they're not hungry, hunger ends up being like there's a knockdown effect from all the other stuff. They're probably hungry because of all this stuff. High flux takes care of that because they're well fed enough that we can then make that change. But to answer your question, no, I just get them to tighten up for 3 weeks. And then if they really are having an issue with that, then like here's a choice: eat 200 less calories or increase your steps or get an extra workout in. Even though I don't believe that is helpful, but I think if they believe it's helpful to do it, so that's kind of the choice thing. Let's get a good idea of where you're really at based on this plan that we have, and then just kind of pull or add. I like add because, again, it's more abundance model. It doesn't have the mental thing of I'm taking away, but sometimes like you can't do anymore. Like if you have like sometimes you just can't do more, and I do empathize with that. Once you get to a certain point, like adding in 2,000 steps a day is fucking a lot. But if you have room to go, like if you're at like 6,000 or 8,000 steps, listen, that's probably going to be a better outcome, in my opinion.
Yeah. I agree with that, and I think as well. Like when you do have a completely committed client, I'm a big fan of, if possible, starting calories low and working up alongside activity. Because I'm assuming when most clients come to me, right, they're super motivated because they've just put money down to pay for a coach, so they're probably going to be more on it with the diet for probably about 3-4 weeks before they start to get a bit complacent. And then at that point, I probably know that their training intensity is going to absolutely suck. They can't create any intent at all. And their activity is probably going to be low. So if I strip them back, if I said, oh, we're going to start calories high and work down, one, you're not going to have the activities to make the most of that. And if I messed up that baseline, if I get my calculation wrong, which is totally feasible, then I might find the first 4 to 6 weeks before anyone loses any weight. Whereas if I start someone on the lower end and go, right, let's strip this back to something that's simple. This is why I'm not against a low carb starting point, because again, right, hit protein, hit vegetables, get them in a really good space. And let's work on getting your flux up. Okay, you're improving your training intensity. Let's add some steps. Let's throw in some front load, some cardio. And as that goes up, I go, and you start to get a bit complacent on the diet and start to get a bit tedious with it. I go, hey, do you want to throw in some potatoes? oh my God, I'd love to throw in some potatoes. And then they do more activity. And they go, hey, do you want to throw in some like rice or a dinner out with your partner? Yeah, that'd be great. And the diet gets easier because you
Mm-hmm.
worked up the food alongside the calories. As they've got more precise with their food, as they've got more active, as they learn to train more intensely, and you just start to build this foundation that becomes the stepping stone to things down the line.
When I would start, so in practical terms, that's pretty much what I do. Like I'll start them pretty low, not pretty low, but like males, like 2,000, like depending on how big they are, 2,000, 2,400 ish, somewhere in there, which again is high. But again, I'm assuming they're not counting, so I know that that's going to be at like 2,600 or whatever it's going to be. They're not going to hit it, and if they are motivated to hit it, they hit it, and they'll lose weight, and you get them. So like I'm all for that because I think especially when you're paying for a service where again the main communicated message is if you hire a coach, you're going to fucking lose weight, they're going to cut calories. Most people are coming in with that unless they see you branded differently or they're coming to you specifically for something. It's generally that. Fucking give it to them 100%. And then, like you said, add in a meal out. But a lot of times, they're already doing that. So, like, what ends up happening is as NEAT scales up and high flux scales up or whatever you want to call it, we just don't change calories for a year because the calories did change, but they were so low, but they were going so high that when they start to tighten up, their calories are just going back down to what I wanted them to get anyways. In a lot of cases, not everyone. And sometimes I'll get people that come in, they'll just do everything we ask. So I'll put calories fairly low, like ish, not low, but like you said, lower carbs and all this stuff, and they'll just melt away. And I'm like, fuck, I need to eat more food. But sometimes they're like, they can crush through that. And again, those are people that I have the best results with, at least initially. The problem I have with those people is if they leave coaching, they're going to go eat up. So I have to make sure I get them to understand that let's raise calories because your baseline is actually here and you're going to eat there. You're just really good at following instructions. So let's now integrate meals out. Very similar to what you said. If I had an ideal client that was going to be successful, it's usually that person. They listen to everything you say, and then you have to add meals out. Hey, go enjoy pizza with your friends because we get to that point where if they don't do that, they're just going to go overboard when they leave. And so adherent clients also are usually ones who need to go out and try this shit slowly on their own because if they just cut off coaching immediately, they'll see all these results and get fucked up because they're just really good at following orders. But if you're not going to pay for orders for your whole life, then that's iffy on my part.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
I totally agree. So there are going to be people that listen to this now. They get to the end of this podcast and they're like, "Well, this guy's called the Walk More King, and he said that he's got a kid now and he has more empathy." Yeah. So, what does a day's worth of activity look like for you right now?
Yeah, so a lot of times I try to test my methods out. A lot of times, but for me, it's funny. Like I'm probably the worst. I'm like the Walk More King, but like my steps are probably like at least before summer, probably like 7,000-8,000 steps a day. I try to keep it that minimum, but my jiu-jitsu schedule is super heavy. So like I'm going 5 to 8 times a week with jiu-jitsu, probably more sometimes. And so like, again, it's not a problem for me because I'm super active and like I actually met that baseline health metric because what ends up happening is if I walk too much or do too much, I get sick or fatigued, and then my jiu-jitsu suffers. So for me, priority number one is jiu-jitsu, but my weight stays stable because I'm getting the output from jiu-jitsu, which again, I'm not expecting people to have because I'm just crazy. But in the summer, like especially with the rucking, I've been like trying to just test some of this shit out. Can I get more of the time I'm getting? And so lately it's just been about a mile. I get about 10,000 steps a day. 3,000 of that is rucking, which again, I'm not going to get into that. There's a whole thing I do on that, but I just kind of double that in terms of steps in my mind. Like met scores, it'd be about double. So I'm probably at like 13,000 steps equivalent plus jiu-jitsu. So I'm probably at that 17,000 step mark if I look at equivalency of output, and I'm not gaining or losing weight. And so I like to test this stuff out. But if I go and walk, which I've done and tested out, if I do 20,000 plus steps, I will lose weight and I'll probably get sick from an energy availability perspective. But I can eat whatever the fuck I want, which is kind of like what I want. I have my certain way of eating, but like if I want to eat out, I do it. And so I've created a lifestyle for myself that's like, I don't have to worry about food. I get my protein in, but if I want to eat more, I eat more. But it all self-regulates because I've tested a lot of this stuff out and found it to be true before even the studies came out, is that my hunger ratings aren't crazy because I'm actually so active that I can eat 3,500 calories and I won't gain or lose weight. It's really hard for me to eat more than that when I'm busy. So it's like sometimes I need to eat dog shit food to get my calories up so I don't get sick. And I don't want everyone to get there, but I want people to get to a place where they can, where food isn't controlling their life. And I think that,
Yeah.
in some terms, energy expenditure is ruling my life, but it's all stuff I like. So it doesn't feel like that. It's like if you work something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. It's kind of the same thing. If you're doing shit you love and attach that to expenditure, I like walking my dog. I just attach a ruck to it. I'm busy with my kid, so instead of sitting on my ass on the couch, I just do shit with my kid, and then so my steps go up, and then I do jujitsu. And so for me, I found what that is, and I hope that, again, the high flux thing is my message. I hope it doesn't get devolved into I have to exercise, I have to walk, I have to do all this. The point is find a process that is energy expenditure oriented, more heavy on the neat part probably, and find stuff you like that fits in that model, as opposed to trying to find stuff that fits in the model of less food, low flux. Because again, I don't think that there is anything people like. Like restricting food, no one's going to get to a point where they like that unless they're in a concentration camp or in a Minnesota starvation study, which they don't like it, but they're doing it, and they have to make the best out of it and find meaning. I don't want people to have to suffer to find meaning. I think you can do it another way, which is a horrible example. But again, I don't want people to find purpose and meaning in very, very restrictive lifestyle. Like, again, you're asking for trouble.
And I presume the push for rucking, as opposed to just the steps up, is just to create a bit more of a caloric expenditure through adding weight, just to have more of a demand.
Yeah, and you can look at Gravastat stuff, and again, a lot of that stuff won't work unless you have lots of. I'm not even getting into that, but yeah, just again, that whole can I squeeze more out of stuff I'm already doing? Rucking on its own, I'll go on about how I think rucking is probably the number one thing for general population most of the time, because it's just walking. It's also very energy expenditure heavy, and it's hard to recover from. So I don't like this. I'm not starting from that point, but I think in terms of microdosing, especially for these neat walks, it ends up becoming I hate it because the byproduct is now I want to lose weight, but I think it can be one of those things where the mental load isn't that high if you're already figuring out a process where you're doing it. So I think rucking for me, especially with general population clients, is additure onto something that they've already found and enjoyed, and just squeezing a little bit more out of it so that they don't have to go to food faster, or so that they don't have to go to the calorie reductions. They can prolong that process. All of my coaching is how long can we prolong, get dipping into the calorie part where it becomes restrictive and kind of messes with lifestyle a little bit. I think it's going to have to get there. I want to prolong that, and I think rucking is a good way of doing it because it solves the time argument. Because if you've already got them to do more, we just layer on a bit more, and then they can do a little bit more at the same time constraints, and then they can get more out of their time. Which, again, from a coaching perspective, I want them to not use that excuse. But I also now, because I work in the real world and I understand it, time is always going to be the excuse. So, like you said, with hey, can you do your emails here? That just, again, starts from a place of I know they're fucking excuses, so let's just get the most out of that. Eventually, I want them to fuck off and not have those excuses. But I'm starting from a place where I'm working with reality of what's going to actually happen, so that I don't have to take calories away. And usually, that's the best way I've found lately. That and walking treadmills. If I was to look at two things that kind of fuck everyone's excuses, or if you can get the walking email work while you're walking, those are like the best ways of doing it. Get more of what they're already going to do. If you can do that, you'll just be way more successful in total with high flux in mind. It's always expenditure in mind in my mind, but that's kind of where my head's at.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think there's an element of working with the excuses, and that's where rucking can become really, really important. And also just I think, as I said earlier, I think people are just very, very unaware. I've had people that go I want to do 8,000 steps as a minimum. And they're like, oh, but that'd be 4 or 5 hours of walking. I'm like, you really have no idea, do you? How, in the same way people don't have any idea about the food, you don't know how long how little time it really takes to do this. And then when you've got someone doing it, then you can scale it up. And I had a mate of mine who was just he lost a few kilos doing harbor walks down here in Hong Kong. And then he added a weighted vest. He lost 10 kilos. And all he did with his food was stop having takeaways. There was no conscious macro tracking. He just took out the excess calories from eating out. He still eats out every now and again, but he went out for it, and he just took away the ease that we spoke about before.
Well, and that's where again, and I believe this is, and especially now if you layer on weighted walks or stuff, I believe if you were to pit one against the other, I think if I could coach the way I wanted to, if people were going to listen, it's fucking walk 17,000 steps or some equivalent, or layer on a weighted vest on that. I don't care what the fuck you do. Figure that out. I bet that would outperform trying to lower calories every day. Like if I could just like charge people to tell them to walk more and they paid me and they did it, I could probably get fucking great results just off rucking or weighted vest work and knee. But like people aren't going to want that for a service. You're going to pay to have someone tell you to walk more. Like no, but that's kind of like my Instagram personalities. I think that will happen. I think in most situations that will outperform. I don't think for everyone, but I think most people are going to eat out less, or they'll figure it out. Because again, if you walk 17,000 steps a day, that's 3.5 hours, 3 hours ish. That's 3 hours where they don't have to, or at least 2 if you base on what they're at. 2 hours where they can't go eat out or whatever. They'll figure it out. I think it'll outperform that every day of the week, 100%. Then you scale up weighted walking with that. You get more out of what you're already doing. Fuck, like I think it's dynamite. But again, I don't think that's the reality right now of where coaching is going. So that's kind of like my intention is, can we kind of get a little bit more of that? But yeah, if I was to pit one against the other, I bet that scenario happens more often than it doesn't. And I think that's cool. I think that's simple and people don't believe it, but like you take a couple meals out a week and walk more, I bet you'll be very fucking surprised.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned BJJ and the amount you do it, and you said it was crazy. And I always feel that there seems to be this trend with people in their 20s are doing bodybuilding, right? And then all of a sudden you get to in their early 30s and they all start shifting their priorities and they all start doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Like if you follow Chris Williamson, he calls it the manopause, where people's priorities change. Yeah. And I've been fighting it for the entire time. I'm not going to be a BJJ guy. I'm going to be a bodybuilder for life. And now I'm 32 and I'm going, maybe I should do some BJJ. So like, what impact has Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu had on your life?
Oh man, where do I start? I think I actually started. I always wanted to do it. Like I actually tried it out when I was 18. I'm a very competitive person. I played college athletics, and then I was a very competitive powerlifter. And I'm always trying to like do stuff. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of offers that. Especially once you do it, you understand that. Especially if you're someone that doesn't mind getting uncomfortable and you like goals, there is no way you're going to reach your goal in terms of getting a black belt or whatever it is, because jiu-jitsu is so fucking hard and you have to put the time in, and there's no other way of doing it. There's very few things in this life where you don't get instantly. Jiu-jitsu is one of them, jiu-jitsu is one of them. Like you can't, it's kind of like running a marathon. You can't run a marathon without putting in the work. You can't be a black belt. You can't learn jiu-jitsu unless you show up and you do it. You get injury free. You learn how to regulate your intensity. You learn all these moves. There's fucking 1,000 of them. There's no way you're going to master it. And I like that part of it. So I think a lot of people, especially in bodybuilding, they're chasing something that they'll never reach to some extent. And I think Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu offers that without having to, with all the bullshit that comes along with bodybuilding or powerlifting. The breakdown is still very similar. I don't think people should get into it thinking they're going to be injury free and they're going to be healthy. Listen, Jiu-Jitsu is not healthy. It kind of is healthy, but like I've been injured more than I've been uninjured. But I think that bug that a lot of us fitness professionals are searching for, or athletes have been searching for, is scalable jiu-jitsu, because you can be competitive into your 70s. We have a guy in our gym that's won worlds at 70, fucking barely can walk, decrepit, fingers are all fucked up, but there's a spot for that. There's an age bracket, there's a weight bracket, and there's a belt bracket for that. And I think that it gives you something that you can do forever, really. Like if the competition scales with age, if you want it to. I don't think bodybuilding really does that. They have masters divisions, but generally it's like, and I think that's another thing. Bodybuilding or powerlifting, very simple in terms of sports. I played football my whole life, and again, that's way more complicated than powerlifting or bodybuilding. You just go fucking lift. It's like the easiest thing ever, really, when you deduce it down to it. Fucking Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu compared to even football, there's thousands of things you can know. I played defensive back in football. You can master most of the plays really in a month. There's not that much going on. Jiu-Jitsu, fuck, it's crazy. So I think like it scratches that itch. Because I think the big thing is competitive and it's athletic, and you get fucking punched in the face. It's great. That's my sell, is that it's great, but it's uncomfortable. It sucks. You get injured, but I think it's unattainable. And I think that's you're always chasing something that you're never going to get, and there's always going to be someone better than you. I go and like I'm pretty athletic. I'm an athletic guy. I learn pretty fast. Like again, I'm an athlete. I get fucked up. Like there's not even like I'm going to win. I'm just like, how do I not die? And so it's humbling, I guess, if you could be humble. Some guys can't, and then they won't last. But again, I would argue that person doesn't last the most shit. So it's a good filter system too. Once you get to blue belt, again, there's only a certain amount of people that can reach it. Kind of like bodybuilding pro shows. It's like there's only a certain amount of people, and those are your people because they made it through that thing. It's a filter system. The people that you probably will like because they're very similar to you, at least in the regard of sticking it out.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about this for now.
I love that, and that is sold. When I do and sign up to my first BJJ class, I'm going to drop you a message and say I did it, and it was your pitch that pushed me over the edge for it. You know, when I have cauliflower ears in 10 years, and I'm beaten and battered and dislocated,
another thing
in every point is you.
To go full circle, this age-related decline of stuff, I think you look at powerlifting, bodybuilding circles, a lot of that kind of falls off around that time because, again, you get less time, you get less stuff like this. I think it's a filter system for finding the people who are still interested in that shit. And it's kind of like people transition from fitness. I think it's just a big part of it. But, again, it gives them that. And there's a social circle involved with that because it's your people. Because after a certain point, it becomes your people because only those people last. And so it's kind of good for finding a social circle of people who last because that gets hard with powerlifting or bodybuilding is because people are going to drop off in the mid-30s. Like, it just, I don't know, for whatever reason, it's just not challenging or it's just not that important. Or I think jiu-jitsu kind of it ends up being more important than that. And so you can have friends longer.
Yes.
Your people are there.
Yeah, I also think as well the thing with bodybuilding, and it's not unless you're really into it, like the proper bodybuilders last because they as you said earlier on, going back full circle again, it's that they fall in love with the process. And don't be wrong, I love the process of bodybuilding, but I am not a bodybuilder per se. I'm not these people that got into it when they're 14 and just like live and breathe bodybuilding. I think when people get to that, they get to their 30s and the priorities change. Well, I just want to move well and feel good, and I want to look good with my shirt off, but like it's not as urgent when I was trying to, bang loads of chicks at 21 as it is now about to get married at 32. And so it's like, well, I'd like to look good as a byproduct, but training specifically for that, like walking specifically for weight loss, isn't the driving force it used to be. Whereas if I was doing, say, BJJ or strongman or just something where there was a little bit more of an external, oh, this is interesting. And then in turn, I follow my nutrition, my flux is up, I look great, I'm going, oh, God, this is worth it. And I think that shifts around about 30 to most guys where they don't need to be Ziz or a Gymshark model anymore.
Yeah, and I don't think jiu-jitsu is going to be for everyone. I think it's kind of like going back to find your thing that you love. I just think that it has all the qualities that a lot of people like us are going to look for. And it checks a lot more boxes than a lot of things, right? And I think that's like, I could go play flag football, but it's like, it's not that challenging. I play college football. Everyone's kind of like trying to beat up the college. Again, it's just not for me. It's not that many days a week. It's once a week. It doesn't check a lot of boxes. Check some, because it's a little bit of competitive. It's hard to find something that checks so many boxes. The negative is I don't think most people are going to last. It's hard. And you get injured. And that's tough to deal with. And again, that's a filter system for me that I like. And so it checks a lot of boxes for me because I know that most people aren't going to do it and they can't do it. That's fucking perfect. That's where I'm going to. Where bodybuilding and powerlifting kind of gets there. It's just too boring for me. It's just not that hard. It's hard to get big and it's hard to enjoy it, but it's just not that much. You're lifting weights. To me as an athlete, like bodybuilding and powerlifting, that's not even a sport in my mind. There's you're doing a few things. There's nothing athletic. Jiu-jitsu is not going to happen. It's just way too complicated and difficult. And I like that about it.
So I have two closing questions before we ask where to find you. One of them is specific to you. One is one I ask every single guest. So the one specific to you, based on the post that got me following you in the first place. Yeah. Right now, in 2023, if there was one thing that you wish you could say to clients without worrying about hurting their feelings, what would it be?
You're not as active as you think.
I like it.
That's it. I could go the other way. It's you eat too much food, but I think that everyone already knows that. I think estimations of expenditure are fucking worse than their estimations on intake. I think people know that they're eating too much. I don't think that they know they're not doing enough, because I think that they feel that they are and they're not.
I think people justify. Yeah, people justify things to themselves with their activity. It's like, well, I did 30 minutes of basketball. I'm like, yeah, but then you sat on the sofa for the rest of the day justifying the 30 minutes of basketball.
It's not enough. That's truthfully what I would say, I think.
So my closing question is to ask everybody that's come on, and it's one that I don't mind if you take a little bit of time to answer. Like it gets a good answer from everybody. Name me one thing that you have changed your mind on.
One thing that I changed my mind on. Oh, that's tough. I think like I've changed my mind on that, and this will go back to kind of the beginning of my assumptions on what everyone is doing. I think that not everyone needs to be in high flux. Like I believe that. So before I thought like I was like I found this hammer, I found this thing. I think everyone needs to do it. I think that there are certain situations where I don't think people are going to change more because of environment and situations, and I think that that's okay. So then I will work within that. They still might not be successful, but I think that there's truly people who are like kind of fucked or whatever, whether it's they have 3 kids and they're single parent, whatever. I empathize with the fact that I don't think high flux is for everyone. Where before I was like, man, like you can find time. I think that there's some people that they may be able to evolve in that, but I think that working with people where they're at, kind of like you were saying, giving people what they came for. I used to, especially when I was trying to really flesh a lot of this out, I was trying to push a lot of what I was doing. I think sometimes, like honestly, calories in is sometimes what all people are capable of, right? And so like that's kind of where I was at the starting of this. I started from that point, went to like fuck all that, you guys are doing everything wrong, to like sometimes it's a tool to me. I think my tool is going to work for most people, but I also understand from a nutrition perspective, I use all the tools. So I don't tell everyone that, but I do think that there are situations where, you know what, fucking go prep your meals and do all this, because that's your best option right now. That makes sense.
Yeah, I love that answer, and I think like it's the general progression of a coach when they can start coming back and realizing that all the tools that I may have demonized 5 years ago are actually things that I can use in certain times. Like I spent a lot of my early career bashing certain diets, like low carbs rubbish and carnivore and keto, and like these things all have their place. In the same way that I used to bash spin class, like this, like Zumba's not going to get you shredded, yeah, but it maybe not. But Zumba is something someone enjoys to get higher flux. Zumba could be the thing at least someone loses the first 2 pounds, and then they go, I quite like this, and then they come into the gym and they find you to lose the next 10 pounds. And I think when you realize that all these things are tools, it just frees up your mind to actually meet a client where they're at.
Yeah, so, and where they're at ends up evolving over time, but I think it evolves as you learn more. But I think really meeting people where they're at is like finding the best tool for the job. I obviously think mine's the best, but it's also like understanding that, and I came from a training background too, is that the workouts aren't the end all be all. Neither are, and as a nutrition coach, neither is the diets. But I think that there's a blend of where we can get to. But yeah, it's like meeting them where they're at, but not just saying it. Understanding where they're at and understanding all the options that people can be at. And I think that comes with experience, and that's really hard to get, especially nowadays, because everyone thinks that they know, but they're just looking at this communication from the Instagram or the interwebs or whatever. And it's like, no, you gotta, there's a whole bunch of spectrums of life. And like, again, I'm trying to shotgun approach. Here's what the best I can catch the most people in, but like, that's my message. But I also understand that that's fucking a really terrible way of coaching sometimes, because then I'm not meeting people where they're at. So understanding my ego in terms of I'm right, you're wrong, I'm still going to believe that, but I also give people things that are going to work too.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Awesome. Great message. So for people who want to learn more about Flux and walking and rucking and BJJ and all the good stuff that you do, where's the best place for people to find you?
So like 2 things I've actually started to push. It's coming. I have getfluxed.ca, but it's at getfluxed.com at Squarespace. But that'll all be linked in through my Instagram account. But so my Instagram account is walk.more.king. Get on my email list is kind of the best way of where I'm transitioning. I put a lot of my base level content on Instagram, and then the next is through my blog and through my newsletter. And for anyone who's like looking to rucking, again, that's usually the most questions I get at, because it's kind of like it's getting a resurgence and bigger. I have like a free rucking guide on just how to basically do the stuff we talked about. How can I add this in as kind of like a free giveaway to say, hey, give me your email, and then we'll kind of here's some information. I have a bunch of videos on like YouTube that are kind of linked through that. So newsletter, website, Instagram, and then again, just kind of follow what I do. But it's as much as I say, like that all I do is right there. It's for real. Like this conversation is what I do, and so all the information I give is more specific to that. But it really is that simple a lot of times, and I don't think people believe that. And that's my goal. Is like it kind of is that simple. We just need to reframe it a little bit.
I will second the fact that definitely go and follow this guy on Instagram. It's the content that will literally, if you have any excuses, it will cut through them and make you act because you realize you're talking shit. And I've downloaded your free ebook today, which I'm going to be using because I want to get into rucking more when I move back to the UK because it will not be the most humid 40 degrees ever, and actually you'll be relatively comfortable to do so. So that, and you've also convinced me on BJJ. So you, in the space of an hour and 20 minutes, you've given me enough motivation to have more high flux in my life. So what can you do to everyone else that watches it? Mate, thank you very much. Really, really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for coming on the show.
Perfect. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for having me.